Okay. All right, my name is Emily and I am a recovered alcoholic. Welcome to the Design for Living Big Book Study. We are in Bill's story on the page 16 at the bottom. Do you want to start, Elizabeth?
That is page
It's
13 at the bottom.
yes,
Yes.
correct.
And yes, I'd be happy to. I'm Elizabeth. I'm an alcoholic. We're in Bill's story. My friend promised when these things were done, I would enter upon a new relationship with my Creator. I would have the elements of a way of living which answered all my problems. Belief in the power of God, plus enough willingness, honesty, and humility to establish and maintain the new order of things were the essential requirements. And of course, I always point out whenever they repeat something over and over. So here they are again talking about a way of living and that it is answering all my problems, not just the drinking problem. And the strong adjective essential requirements. I mean, could it be any more? So he had just gone over on page 13 kind of the things he learned from the Oxford group, the need for inventory, making amends, trusting God, all that stuff. Simple but not easy. A price had to be paid. It meant destruction of self-centeredness. I must turn in all things to the Father of light who presides over us all. These were revolutionary and drastic proposals, but the moment I fully accepted them, the effect was electric. There was a sense of victory followed by such a peace and serenity as I had ever known. There was utter confidence. I felt lifted up as though the great clean wind of a mountaintop blew through and through. God comes to most men gradually, but his impact on me was sudden and profound. And I think it's pretty interesting that they're already talking about self-centeredness this early in the book, because they talk about it a whole lot more later. And the talk I did yesterday I did a talk yesterday on Dr. Harry Tiebow's papers and the alcoholic ego. And he talked a lot about this ego, and he also talked about the need for surrender, which he saw in AA, the alcoholic hitting bottom, had this little time when his ego was reduced, and then he was open to help. And when this happened in an alcoholic, the alcoholic would have a sense of peace. They've finally given up the fight. They're finally saying, "Oh, I need help," and the ego is not running the show. And I know some people call that the window of opportunity when you want to grab a hold of a newcomer and say, "Hey, okay, come on, we got a solution for you. Let's go," before your ego comes back, because it will, right? And but I love how they point out, this is revolutionary and drastic. They mention that a few times, and I think that's so important, especially, Emily's younger in recovery than I am. I'm pretty much an old timer now, right? I'm 37 years, and there are things I still don't want to do. The spiritual life, the living these principles will guide me, it will urge me to act in a way that I still don't want to act. And I think, wait a minute, do I really believe in this stuff? Do I really believe this works? And do I really need to do this? And this isn't the only time they say, yeah, this is pretty drastic. You're giving up your way of life, your old way of life, and I could just talk about that all day, but I won't do that because this is a book study and not a qualification. So Emily, why don't you speak on that for a bit?
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like this is like right after he had his spiritual experience and he was realizing that he finally found a God of his understanding. I like how he pointed out enough willingness, honesty, humility to establish and maintaining the new order of things were essential requirements. I feel like that is just the basis of AA when we first come in. Like that is the only thing that is required of us, to make steps 1, 2, and 3. And I also like it says, I meant destruction of self-centeredness. I know that I am very selfish and self-centered at times when I'm not spiritually fit, but I also know Bill was very selfish and self-centered too as well. And I like how he put this. And then it says, God comes to men gradually, but his impact on me was sudden and profound. That is my experience as well. As when I first came in, and I finally picked up a white chip and got sober. Like, God made His presence very like, um, very sudden and profound for me. Like it was just really clear, crystal clear that I needed to get sober and do these things, which is the 12 steps. And I did exactly what this book said. So I definitely like to point that out because a lot of people miss that in these 2 pages here. But I'll continue to read. For a moment, I was alarmed and called my friend, the doctor, to ask if I were still sane. He listened in wonder as I talked. Finally, he shook his head, saying, "Something happened to you. I don't understand, but you better hang on to it. Anything is better than the way you were." The good doctor now sees many men who've had such experiences. He knows that they are real. While I lay in the hospital, the thought came that there were thousands of hopeless alcoholics who might be glad to have what had been so freely given to me. Perhaps I could help some of them. They in return might work with others. And yeah, that definitely is like his experience early on because we didn't have the 12 steps before, this story. And this is just how, he experienced it. You know, he obviously had been in the hospital 4 different times, and that is exactly what the doctor had told him is, he was way better off when he had this sudden and profound change because he was way better off than he was, that's for sure, because he couldn't even function and do his daily life. And poor Lois had just had to put up with him. But she loved and tolerated him for sure. And it says they in return might work with others. That is step 12. So once we become sober and we pass this message on, that is step 12. We're supposed to pass on the message and help other people that were suffering as well as when we first came in. So um, there's just like hidden little steps in here that I realized as we go through this. So yeah, I think that's all I have. You have anything, Elizabeth?
No, but I love this next part. We're at the bottom of 14. My friend had emphasized, again, the absolute necessity of demonstrating these principles in all my affairs. Particularly was it imperative to work with others as he had worked with me. Sorry, I don't want to read with emphasis because it annoys me when people do that, but I get this paragraph is like probably my favorite one in the book. Honestly, if I had to pick one, this would be it. So I'll chill on that. Particularly was it imperative to work with others as he had worked with me. Faith without works was dead, he said, and how appallingly true for the alcoholic. For if an alcoholic failed to perfect and enlarge his spiritual life through work and self-sacrifice for others, he could not survive the certain trials and low spots ahead. If he did not work, he would surely drink again, and if he drank, he would surely die. Then faith would be dead indeed. With us, it is just like that. This was the paragraph I used actually to wrap up the talk yesterday because, you know, when I came into AA, it was the self-help era. We were all reading everything but the big book. We were all in therapy. We were all talking about ourselves, and that was pretty much it. That's all we were doing. Nobody was helping anyone. You'd have the one old timer that was sponsoring everybody else, right? Nobody else was sponsoring. That was some mysterious thing that nobody had time for, and what was important about it anyway? Oh yeah. Um, and and like later on, like I've been through some trials and some low spots for sure. I mean, I went through some really hard times, and I I am so grateful that by the time some of the hardest times hit, I was in the middle of AA. I was helping others. I was doing everything that AA suggests. I was in a home group. I was doing service. I was meeting with my own sponsor. I was doing step work. I was praying all day and learning how to use 10 all day and 11 all day. That it wasn't just a once a day exercise, and that um, and I had sponsees I was meeting with regularly, and it was just and sharing with my home group, telling them what was happening in my life because I had to because it was so painful, and they would call on me in the after meeting, to ask me what was going on. And I came so close to a drink at 34 years sober that it shocked me how close it was. I didn't know how it could happen. It can happen. I was in a lot of pain, and we're recorded. And somebody said, I heard you on YouTube last week. So I'm just going to try not to get the personal details of my life out there too much. So it was kind of funny. I was like, oh yeah, that's right. This seems so intimate right here with us. Um, but yeah, the inspiration that came to me was you are showing other people that you can stay sober through this time. and you're not going to lose your sobriety. And that wasn't what I conjured up in my head, right? It came to me, and I thought, wow, I'm so grateful I was in the middle, because I do believe in the deadliness of this disease, for sure. But what's amazing is, and I would love to share this talk about Tebow, because what Tebow says is therapy isn't enough because it just keeps us in self. We just sit around. Now we have fancier language for talking about ourselves. So Bill wrote this before Tebow got involved. Now, someone who's a historian in here, which I know there's one, can correct me. But I don't know if Bill knew about what Tebow wrote about when he saw how AA worked, the surrender, the openness then of the people, and now they're helping others, right? Now they're getting out of themselves and they're going and helping other people. So they're not sitting around thinking about themselves anymore. And he saw how this worked. And he said therapy is not enough. He wrote a whole paper about why therapy was not enough for alcoholics. Because our insight, we just start intellectualizing. Now we think, oh, I understand my problem, so now I can control it, right? And I think it is an absolute genius line, where he says, if he did not work, he would die, and the faith with works. He says, with us, it is just like that. That's like him writing about the mental blank spot before they even knew how the brain worked. He saw something, he got a hold of something, and he used it. And then later on, this educated psychiatrist saw this process and wrote more about it, and how what the change that occurs in people when they stay surrendered and humble and go help others, right? And then, I landed back on this once. I love the Jim and the whiskey and the milk story on 35 and 36, right? And I used to think, my husband and I would argue about this, right? I'd say, well, he drank because he had a resentment, right? And my husband would say, And then I realized, wait, if we all drank every time we had a resentment, we'd all be drunk all the time, right? And when I was in the book with the sponsee one day, and it said, all on page 35, it says, Jim, all went well for a time, but he failed to enlarge his spiritual life. And I thought, what does that mean? I've heard that before because I was in the book a lot with sponsees. And I went to, I'm gonna put this on the recording, 164andmore.com, 164 the numbers and more.com. If you think I remember a word or a phrase and I want to see where it is in the big book in the 12 and 12, you can go to that website and put it in there. So I went over there, and then it led me back to this bottom of 14, top of 15. Oh, here's what it means, right? It says, for if an alcoholic failed to perfect and enlarge his spiritual life through work and self-sacrifice for others, and then I can stay sober on a good day, but those trials and those low spots, when God's given me everything I want and I think our will is aligned, everything's great, I'm fine. And then it's when I don't get what I want or something awful happens, right? How much am I trusting God then? How much am I in the actions of AA then? At my home group, if you try to quit service, just try. Oh, I'm going through something. I need to step away from service. We have a little chat with Elizabeth, is what happens. I'm like, wait a minute. Unless you really can't come because you're running, you don't have time. Let's talk about how much you need service more when you're going through a hard time, because the idea that you need to go have more time to think about yourself is really the opposite of what AA is saying. So, and I do it gently, but it's funny. They all know. Try to leave. Just you're gonna get a text from her. So, go ahead, Emily. I know. I mean, we could do a whole hour on this paragraph, right? I mean, do you love it as much as me? I'm sure you do.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, this just reminds me of, I tried everything before I came into the program. I tried the hospitals, institutions, I tried the self-help books, I tried podcasts, counseling, all that fun stuff. And just nothing ever like clicked and worked with me, until I did come into the rooms. It's I don't know, it's something about the steps that, once we read this book, like it just clicks. I don't even know how to explain it, but it just it's me in a nutshell, for sure. It just makes very much sense, and it's very comparable, even though this book was written in the 1930s. It just this is definitely all of us in a nutshell. I do like that sentence, and I know she's covered this before, but it says, if he did not work, he would surely drink again, and if he were drink, he would surely die. Like, yeah, absolutely. That is what brought me into these rooms finally, at such a young age. Like, I had drank myself to death, and unfortunately, the paramedic had to bring me back. And that's kind of when God had given me that rude awakenings. Like, yeah, this is enough. This is your last chance. Because I started drinking like really young. Like, I wasn't even double digits when I started drinking. So I already had like 20 something years of like my drinking career, even before I hit 23. So God was just trying to get me to that point where um drinking was enough. And I tried all the self-help and everything, but that just did not work. And I just love how this program does work if we work it. I've been through obviously a lot too in sobriety, and no matter what, I was just told that just don't drink no matter what. I just throw myself into service work. And yeah, I've tried that too, Elizabeth. I try to get out of service work and they're like, nope, you're going to try this instead. So they give me even more service work. But I don't say no because that's what I was taught in this program. But yeah, I definitely like this page as well. I could go on and on, but I won't. So Elizabeth, you want to read?
Okay. Ah, my wife and I abandoned ourselves with enthusiasm to the idea of helping other alcoholics to a solution of their problems. It was fortunate for my old business associates remained skeptical for a year and a half, during which I found little work. I was not too well at the time and was plagued by waves of self-pity and resentment. This sometimes nearly drove me back to drink, but I soon found that when all other measures failed, work with another alcoholic would save the day. Many times I've gone to my old hospital in despair. On talking to a man there, I would be amazingly lifted up and set on my feet. It is a design for living that works in rough going. So there it is again. And it really blows me away that when people are having trouble, they're guided to call their sponsor or go to a meeting. I say no. Make sure you have a lot of newcomer numbers. You're going to need them more than they need you. Go check on the person on day 3. Day 3 is hard. Go check on the person on, I just had someone message me. They're on day 73. They're having a hard time, you know. Um, and it happened to me, I was 37 years sober. I had something happen at Christmas. I've been around this block. I've done therapy. I've done all kinds of stuff. And I am eaten up because of something going on in my family, family of origin. And I don't like it. And it's hurt. It's painful and it's grief and it's a loss. And it is the background noise of my life. And I feel depressed for like the first 6 weeks of this year, literally. Was grieving some things about my family. And one day I was sitting there and I was thinking about what I'm going to do about it. I'm going to write an email to this person and I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. Meanwhile, the other side of my brain's like, Elizabeth, that's never worked. Why would you do that? You're just going to cause all this conflict. Then you're going to be the one crying wolf or crazy again, saying the pink elephant in the room, in which case they always, turn around and say, you're the one who's crazy, right? We know this. This is a pattern I've played out many, many times in my life, right? So we're talking about repeating the same actions and getting the same results, right? But I'm thinking this time, and I'm laughing at myself in my mind. And then it hit me, wait a minute. There's a newcomer in my group that wants to read chapter 3 together. Why don't you go see if she's free? And I did. And within minutes, I'm on Zoom with a woman in England who I just adore, and I'm just amazed that I get to be part of this woman's life. I've been through their train station even. I've actually even been to her city. And I thought, wow, look at this, And he says that, right? He says, it lifts him up. He's amazingly lifted up. But how often do you hear people say that in AA today? Go help somebody to get out of self, No. I mean, all through growing up in AA, I heard, call your sponsor. One time I called my sponsor to tell her about a problem, and she said, go call Michelle and ask her how she's doing. And I said, but I need to talk about me. And she said, no, you don't. And then she hung up on me. I mean, thank God. And I was ready for her. I was desperate. I mean, by the time I got with this sponsor that was the big book thumping, hardcore, came out of Denver, and she knows her crap. And thank God, right? Because I still listen to her. And she's solid. And She taught me what this program is really about, and it's not about what, I mean, a therapist will say, "You're stuffing your feelings." You know what? I'm feeling my feelings just fine, and I need to turn and take some action because I'm an alcoholic, and I don't want those feelings to take me back to a bottle. I wanna live, and this thing works, you know? And you know how many people you can tell when people have too much time to think about themselves and they don't have enough people to work with. And you gotta and it's a numbers game. I mean, I hope we talk about I don't know, because we don't really have sponsorship talked about in the big book, but if anybody feels like they're failing because they can't keep enough people sober, trust me, you're not. It's a numbers game. Just keep putting your number out there and get more sponsees because yeah, most of them don't stay. Most of them, the ratio is pretty small from people you talk to initially to the people who actually get through any steps. And I need a number of people like that in my life for me to keep me out of self because I'm retired and my kids are grown. So I just want to emphasize that point as strongly as we can for anybody. Go ahead, Emily.
Yeah, I 100% have been through that too with my sponsors that I've had, they're like, "Oh, call somebody. Maybe they need help with, their fourth step and needs some like encouragement or, calling a newcomer and giving them a ride to a meeting or, something like that. It just keeps me out of myself. I've tried therapy, I've tried pills and things that that psychiatrists recommend and all that and just all that stuff is just worldly stuff. It does not work for this kind of alcoholic. It's me getting plugged in, even making a coffee at a meeting for somebody or um showing them what page on the book that we're in, or something, anything that kind of keeps me out of myself. It just me in my head, it does not have a good combo for sure. So that's pretty much all I have to say about that, but I can read the next paragraph. We commenced to make many fast friends, and a fellowship has grown among us, of which it is a wonderful thing to feel a part. The joy of living we really have, even under pressure and difficulty. I've seen hundreds of families set their feet in the path that really goes somewhere, have seen the most impossible domestic problems righted, feuds and bitterness of all sorts wiped out. I have seen men come out of asylums and resume a vital place in their lives of their families and communities. Business and professional men have regained their standing. There is scarcely any form of trouble and misery which has not been overcome about among us. In one Western city and its environs, there are 1,000 of us and our families. We meet frequently so that newcomers might find or may find the fellowship they seek. At all informal gatherings, one may often see from 50 to 200 persons. We are growing in numbers and power. And in mine has an asterisk. It says in 2014, AA is composed over 2 million groups. I feel like now that has like tripled, in the years. But yeah, absolutely. I just like that sentence that I just read. It says, I have seen hundreds of families set their feet in the path that domestic situations, righted feuds, and bitterness of all sorts have wiped out. Um, and then I have seen men come out of asylums and resume a vital place in the lives of our families and communities. Yeah, absolutely. I don't think that is the answer for us alcoholics. They just don't need to lock us up. We just need AA and help and rehab and all that stuff. And then of course, obviously a sponsor and working the steps. I think that's what works. Of course, back in the day, they didn't know what to do and they didn't really know much about alcoholism, but now that we do, and we're in this current stage of our lives, that definitely I think is the answer and it works. So that's all I have. You have anything, Elizabeth?
Actually, I have nothing to add to that. You did great. We can why don't you keep reading?
Okay. An alcoholic in his cups is a lovely creature. Our struggles with them are various, strenuous, comic, and tragic. One poor chap committed suicide in my home. He could not or would not see our way of life. There is, however, a vast amount of fun about it all. I suppose some would be shocked at our seemingly worldliness and levity, but just underneath there is deadly earnestness. Faith has to work 24 hours a day and through us or we perish. Most of us we need look no further than for utopia. We have it with us right here and now. Each day, my friend's simple talk in our kitchen multiplies itself in a widening circle of peace on earth and goodwill to men. Bill W., co founder of AA, died January 24th, 1971. Elizabeth?
Yeah, some of these statements, I find that when somebody goes through the book the first time, they don't matter as much. But things like he could not or would not see our way of life, faith has to work 24 hours a day, in and through us, or we perish, you know. Often when we're here and it's like, oh yeah, this is all sounds great. I'm sober. I'm starting to feel better because I'm not doing things I feel ashamed of anymore, But then when it comes to there's something going on in my life that I really don't like, then it's like, oh, okay. I met someone yesterday who's, not mobile for a while, and she hates it. She's having to live with that, she had a health thing happen. And this is where statements like that really start to matter. Because again, remember, we're not just talking about a drinking problem here. We're not talking about just not drinking. We're talking about a way of life. So when things happen I don't like, do I trust God with it? Do I have faith about it? Can I stay in today and say, all right, what do I do today about this? Do I go to God and say, hey, I don't necessarily like what you're doing, but you're in charge. So, I mean, we're not at that step yet, but we'll get there, right? But yeah, statements like that, like if you run through the book a few times, which I've definitely gone through this book many times. I mean, as a sponsee and as a sponsor, and and they're like, when did they put these new sentences in, right? And of course we know they're not. But once I go out and have a lived experience, and then I go back and I look at the book, and it's like, oh my God, it was here all along, right? It's self-centeredness that's killing me, This is about everything. So that's all I have. And yay, we finished Bill's story. Awesome. Time for
I just have one thing to add.
okay.
I definitely like it says an alcoholic in his cups is an unlovely creature. I definitely 100% agree with that. Like most of us are not really good people before we come into this program. We are very mean and selfish and self-centered, and we cheat on people, we lie about them, we steal, we do all these things. But once we come into the program, like we have a chance in our lives to turn our life around 100%. Like I know I can see that in my life. Like, I'm not as like selfish and self-centered, like my defects aren't as glaring as they used to, when I first come in. People actually like being around me. Imagine that. And I never thought that that would ever happen in my life. But yeah, I just wanted to add that. And then of course it says one poor chap committed suicide in my home. I've seen that happen, unfortunately. I've seen people, go out and, they kill themselves because they don't see the hope, and unfortunately they just don't stick around long enough to see that there is a solution, and that is the next chapter. So I thought I'd throw that in there because that is evidently the next chapter that we are going to be reading. But a lot of them just give up. They're like, I just want to drink and drug, and they want to drown and stuff their feelings. But until we deal with ourselves and our problems, and that's what the 4 steps about, and telling our sponsor that we trust, that we're not going to be able to stay sober without that. Because I have definitely tried multiple times in my life and I was just not successful whatsoever. So yeah, there is hope. We just got to stick around for sure. And it does work because I see 16 of us that have stuck around. So I know it does work. So I don't know how, but it does. All right, you want to start the next page?
Sure. Okay, we're on page 17, chapter 2. There is a solution. We of Alcoholics Anonymous know thousands of men and women who were once just as hopeless as Bill. Nearly all have recovered. They have solved the drink problem. Let's take a moment on that. There's so much misunderstanding about the word recovered. It's like, well, wait, but we're not cured. Aren't we still recovering? And there they are again. They've said it before. But they're pointing out the hopelessness, because remember, these people were hopeless. They didn't have a solution. Remember, it said most alcoholics are doomed, it said in the doctor's opinion. So when we're talking about being recovered, it's because we have a solution and we don't have to live with the disease anymore. My husband and I are both in active recovery, and there's a list of what that means, right? It doesn't just mean going to meetings. That's not active recovery at all. And because of that, we have a reaction to life that is different, than we are when our disease, as Emily just pointed out. I was awful when I drank. Oh my God. I cheated, I lied, I stole. I stole so much 80s makeup from this one drugstore. Oh my God. It just, purple eyeshadow, and I would fill up my purse and feel nothing about it. No problem, right? I mean, I was numbed out, right? But it doesn't mean I'm cured. It's like being in remission, I've heard some people call it. As long as I do this, as long as I practice the steps. Now, for me, I respect my friends that need to say the words recovered or recovering. I just say alcoholic. That's just my choice. Some people say real alcoholic. They think there's a lot of heavy drinkers in AA. Oh well, okay. Anyway, it's we're all different, and I believe that however that is, right, is it's speaking to somebody. Somebody needs to hear it, whether you say it one way or another.
Mm.
I know, Emily, you do say recovered, don't you? Do you want to say anything about that?
I only say recovered because it's in the format, but I mean, I feel like, once, we're in recovery and recovering, the ing, but I feel like, once we go through the steps and we sponsor other people, we can say we are recovered. It is been, it is time and time again saying that in the book, because, we are not like 100% cured, but we are like in recovery. So it's like um a future tense, as what I'm trying to say. It's
That's
kind of
actually a
like,
great point, right? Because they're telling us what they did.
yeah, yeah,
So
absolutely. And it isn't in the present, like, I am recovered because I'm not currently using and drinking, and I'm still in this process of recovery. So yeah, I just wanted to point out the we of Alcoholics Anonymous. If it doesn't say I or me or myself, but it says we, because it is a we program. Most people come to me and they're like, why does it say we? And I'm like, it's because it's not an I, myself, or me program. It's a we recovery, because I could not do this alone. We all have definitely tried, and it does not work. So it is all of us that have to be in a fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. So that's all I have to say about that, but I can continue to read. We have average Americans, all sections of this country, and many of its occupations are represented, as well as many political, economical, social, and religious backgrounds. We are people who would normally not mix. But there exists among us a fellowship, a friendliness, and an understanding which is indescribably wonderful. We are like the passengers of a great liner. The moment after rescue from shipwreck, when camaraderie, joyousness, and democracy pervade the vessel from steerage to captain's table. Unlike the feelings of the ship's passengers, however, our joy in escape from disaster does not subside as we go in our individual ways. The feeling of having shared in a common peril is one element in the powerful cement which binds us, but that in itself would never have held us together as we are now joined. I love that, because we are alcoholics of many different backgrounds and um countries and languages and continents and all that, but we all have one thing in common. We are all having an issue with alcohol or drugs. But it doesn't matter where we're from, what color, what creed, what language we speak, what whatever. But all we have is one problem in common, is alcohol or drugs. And I just love how it does not segregate, because that is definitely a problem, but this does not, because it's applicable to everyone. So that's all I have for that. Elizabeth. You're on mute.
All I want to add to that is that online meetings have even increased that, right? Now that you mentioned other countries, I mean, we
Mhm.
didn't get to do that before. Now that's a part of daily life for those of us who are online. It is amazing to me the people I get to meet and get to know and get to work with. And I mean, that element of it is amazing, right? So that's all I wanted to say. Why don't you keep reading?
Okay. The tremendous fact for every one of us is that we have discovered a common solution. We have a way out which we can absolutely agree and upon which we can join in brotherly and harmonious action. This is the great news that this book carries for those who suffer from alcoholism. Yeah, absolutely. That is definitely the common solution that we all have. And again, this is a we program, so we all have to do it together. Otherwise, we are not going to survive and succeed in life. That is all I have. Do you have anything?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, to point out that this book carries the solution in it, because we hear a lot of different things in AA and meetings and rhetoric that actually contradicts what the program says. So I think it's important to point this out. And then,
Mhm.
a little later on in the book, it says the steps are suggested. Have you ever heard the people that don't want to work the steps and they say, well, it says it's suggested. Really, do you know what suggested meant in 1939? That's one of those places where the difference in what the word means matters. I heard it was subtle command, right?
Mhm.
We don't use it that way today. But if you want what these people had, if you want recovery, they're telling you how they recovered. That's the purpose of the book, is to show you how they recovered, right? And so I like that. It's like we have a way out on which we can agree and upon which we can join. And so it's telling us that the book has the solution. It is the solution, right? It's not a million other things people talk about, and I run around in some of these Facebook groups where a lot of times people haven't even gotten to a meeting yet. They have no clue what's going on, and it's interesting, and guess what? A lot of them are totally miserable. They don't have any kind of, they're like, this one lady, I've managed to stay sober 4 months and I'm absolutely furious all the time. And it's like, well, do you have a program of recovery? Let's talk about this. And I always invite them to contact me. Most of the time they don't. I say it real nice though. You know what I do? I try to really work on that, but just say, of course, yeah, a lot of alcoholics can't stay sober without really undergoing a lot of changes. Otherwise, they're going to be miserable. A lot of people don't know that, you know? So, yeah, that's it.
Yep. You want to go ahead and open up the room?
Well, we got a few more minutes.
Okay. All
30
right.
minutes.
We'll do one more paragraph. You gonna read the next paragraph?
Yeah. Page
Okay.
18, guys, we're on the top of 18. An illness of this sort, and we have come to believe is an illness, involves those about us in a way no other human sickness can. If a person has cancer, all are sorry for him and no one is angry or hurt, but not so with the alcoholic illness. For with it there goes annihilation of all things worthwhile in life. It engulfs all whose lives touch the sufferers. It brings misunderstanding, fierce resentment, financial insecurity, disgusted friends and employers, warped lives of blameless children, sad wives and parents. Anyone can increase this list. And I say there's 3 places in the book you can look to gauge your recovery as you're in recovery and you're going along, or after you've completed the steps and you're wondering, how am I doing? And this is one of them. So the first paragraph on page 18, the middle of 52, where it talks about the good elements, and pages 60 to 63, and then compare those to the promises. And don't just compare them to the promises we often hear about. The 5th step promises are beautiful. We can look the world in the eye. We can be at perfect peace and ease, right? There's a lot of great ones. You can just Google like promises in the big book and get, somebody compiled an entire list of promises and see, how am I doing? Am I living in the disease, or am I living in active recovery from this disease? And this is one of the places. Do I still have these things? Fierce resentment, misunderstanding, financial insecurity. Do I still have all these things when I'm sober? Right. So I just like to point that out because they're really good gauges, to see how I'm doing and where am I weak in my program? Is there something I'm not doing? And usually there's an answer. Yeah, usually something's out of balance, right? I
Yeah.
drag my feet to put pen to paper. That's my weakness. But I'll call people all day and I'll go help newcomers, get me to write inventory. So that's all I have on that. What about you?
That's funny. Yeah, absolutely. I definitely suffer to do pen to paper too. I like to procrastinate on my inventories for sure, and my sponsor gets on my ass about it. Um, but yeah, I definitely agree with the last sentence. It brings misunderstanding, fierce resentment, financial insecurity, disgusted friends and employers, warped lives of blameless children, and sad wives and parents. Anyone can increase this list. Um, yeah, that's definitely, when we're drinking and we're active, we feel these things and we destroy everyone and everything, in our path. And yeah, I definitely have put employers in hell, and I have felt financial insecure because I'm spending money on a bunch of useless stuff, and my parents, and all that stuff. It's not very healthy, but this is what we do when we're active and we don't know any better. We're very selfish and self-centered. We just don't care what or how we do things in life, and this is why we come in and we make it right. So yeah, that is all I have. You want
Let's
to
do the
open up
next
the board?
paragraph and then we can open it
Okay.
up. We can
All right.
stop at the italics.
Okay.
We hope this volume will inform and comfort those who are or may be affected. There are many highly competent psychiatrists who have dealt with us, found it sometimes impossible to persuade an alcoholic to discuss his situation without reserve. Strangely enough, wives, parents, and intimate friends usually find us even more unapproachable than do the psychiatrist and the doctor. Now I'll read the next one. The ex-problem drinker who has found the solution, who is properly armed with the facts about himself, can generally win the entire confidence of another alcoholic in a few hours. Until such an understanding is reached, little or nothing can be accomplished. And then I'd love to save the next one for next week, but it really points out the difference that it starts to talk about the magic of AA, and what it is that it starts to make us open up, and I remember that very first, maybe the very second day I was in AA, and I was hanging out with this girl named Kara, who I still don't know where she is. Like I've tried to track her down over the years. So if you hear this on YouTube, Kara, but she spent a lot of time with me the first week, and she was around my age. And I remember her telling me all these things about herself that I wasn't ready to admit, it was worse than mine, and she put me at ease. And I never heard anyone talk about like the real stuff, the things that I was feeling. I remember going to meetings and thinking, did they get together and talk about me before the meeting? Why are they reading my mind? How do they know what I'm thinking about? And that was amazing. I mean, that was something I wanted. I wanted connection. I was a very lonely person, just trying to get through life and acting out, trying to get through things the best I could, making all kinds of bad decisions. And then I meet these people that are sharing from the heart, you know. What about you, Emily?
Yeah, definitely. I can relate. I isolated a lot. I didn't want to talk to anyone, be around anyone, do anything. I wanted to stay in my room, went to school, came back, did the same thing on repeat. And until I came into the rooms and I heard what these people were saying, like they were so happy. I could not, understand it. And they're like, oh, let's go do this and do that. And I'm just like, no, I don't want to do anything. But until I realized that, I'm able to deal with my stuff and actually be happy, joyous, and free for once in my entire life. I'm actually willing and able to do anything, that is AA related now, whether it's going to go get a cake for a celebration, or go to a speaker meeting, or hold events, or do intergroup you know roles and stuff like that. So it is definitely a life flip for me, because I didn't want to do anything prior, and I just kind of isolated. But now that I'm sober, I want to be able to go do things and talk to people, and be there for them. And I do anything I can in my power to be available for a newcomer. So that is all I have. I think we are going to open up the room now, so let me stop the recording, and then it's all yours.